Harvest season. Wheat harvesting is almost concluded with encouraging figures from France, and corn is still pending. Today I'm joined by Bertrand Oesterle, Vice President of Clearing and Execution Sales, for a more in-depth look at where we are. Thank you for joining us, Bert. So please can you update us on harvest progress in Europe?
So recently we've mostly heard from our French participants. The cooperatives have been very talkative, and the crop is progressing pretty well in wheat. So the harvest is 80 to 95% complete according to various people we've spoken to, and the conditions are pretty good. We're being told that it's a good to very good crop. The specific weights are high, 80 to 83 kilograms per hectoliter, and we've had reassurance also on the protein level. It is coming back to an 11% plus average, which is good for Euronext, good for exports. The only concern in a way is still the price. Prices are still low, and farmers are complaining of the fact that it's still below cost of production. And also some farmers have been concerned by some figures from Agrimer showing a potential end of season ending stock at 3.87 million tons, which is a 21-year high. And farmers are starting to realize that the S&D is somehow heavy. Now, when we go next door to Germany, the Germans have had a little bit less luck than the French. There's been some delay due to rain in some areas, but overall the German cooperatives are telling us that it should be a better crop, about 16.5%, 21.56 million tons. And if I go back to France in terms of estimates, we've seen estimates from the cooperatives between 31 and 33.5 million tons. More specifically, Agrimer is at 32.6 million tons, and we had Argus at 33.4 million tons. And right this morning we had a Bulgarian update as well. They've told us that the harvest is 78% completed, 5.77 million tons harvested so far. Their estimate is still encouraging to 6.1 to 6.3 million tons, while next door in Romania we're still expecting a record crop. So generally speaking, a good element of results that we're getting. And when we look at Europe overall, Maize, which is one of the EU Commission bodies, they're putting the overall yield estimate at 6.09 ton per hectare, slightly better than 6.08 last month, and it's some 6% better than the 5-year average. So when we look at Paris wheat specifically, the September contract has tried to go up to 204. The SEPDEC has rallied to minus 750. So I've been talking about the SEPDEC a lot over the past few weeks. We were in a range of about minus 1325 to minus 9.5. We've broken up to that above that range last week to minus 850. We touched minus 750 actually yesterday. So we're looking at the OI, and the OI is showing a shift. We've lost 5,000 lots of OI in September. We've gained 5,000 lots in December over the past 5 days. There's some evidence that the specs and the funds in particular are rolling, but it's starting slowly. And the focus will be from now all the way to the 15th of August when we have the option expiry. As of last week, the funds were still short some 273,000 lots. We have an update at 4 o'clock. I guess Euronext will be around the minus 240 mark, but we'll see.
And what about Russia and Ukraine wheat? What's happening?
So Russia has been it left us guessing for the past week or so. So we had Putin coming in with a decree this week saying that all foreign ships that come to Russian ports will need to be FSB cleared. So that's a logistical twitch in a way. And when we look at what's going on at ports, we've heard noise of slow port arrivals, and the slow port arrivals have been questioned by many in the trade, saying what's going on in Russia. Is it because there's a bad crop? So we've tried to find out an answer, and we've had mixed responses. The bears are saying it's not really about the bad crop, it's about the fact that the first cuts went to stocks instead of going to ports initially, and that could make sense when we see that the port arrivals are starting to pick up. But still, the bulls are saying we need to question the quality. In March we had dryness. What is going on with the harvest? So we've asked around to our Russian participants or people who deal with Russia, and we've been told that, for example, Rostov, which is the main wheat area has seen lower yields than expected, so some 3.4 tons per hectare compared to 4 expected. The harvest is about 40% completed there, but Stavropol, for example, is 90% harvested, and it's much better. The yields are much better. And if we look at Krasnodar, the southern part is yielding better and making up for some of the northern part which had been affected by heat. So in a way, it's a mixed message from Russia, which is saying some areas are worse, some areas are better. Overall, they make up for each other. Now, in terms of production estimates, we've seen LSEG at 83.2 million tons, Sovecon at 83.6, ICAR at 84, so they're very much in the same cluster. And the government was at 90 million tons. And with those results, the government has actually changed its forecast to an 88 to 90 million tons. So they've basically taken 2 million tons away. In terms of exports, the exports have been slow so far. We've been told some 500,000 tons compared to 1.2 at the same time last year. And Sovecon is still giving us a 2.4 million ton export target for July, which is better than the 1.2 of the previous month, but it's lower than the 3.6 last year. And next door to Ukraine, we hear the same. The harvest is slightly slower, but we are being told that the proportion of milling wheat is higher, which is again an indication of better quality. And in terms of exports, the exports have started slowly. It's some 250,000 tons compared to 1 million ton plus normally at this time.
And what about the demand side in wheat?
So demand has been interesting this week. We had last week a big 1 million ton tender from Algeria. Since then, it's been quieter. We've had a few Taiwanese or Tunisian tenders, so regular, nothing out of the ordinary tenders. But what we've seen from the international demand side in a way is reassurance that maybe the demand is not that pressing. So we've seen, for example, Iraq saying that they've got stocks to cater for 16 months of demand. We've seen, for example, China producing their figures for imports for June at just 350,000 tons. That's 71% less than the same month last year. And that's an interesting figure to look at, because in June, we've been hammering the story of China having heat, potentially affecting the crop. And since then, the USDA kept the crop estimate at 142 million tons. The Statistic Bureau came in at 138. If they haven't imported massively in June, it means that somehow they're not panicking about their crop. And the last one I could think of is, oh yes, India. India is interesting because for the past year or so, we've been told that the stocks in India were very low. It was a political issue. The target for this year was 27.6 million tons. Yesterday, the July 1st stock figure came in at a whopping 35.9 million tons. So it seems that the issue in India in terms of replenishing the stocks is dealt with, to the point that people are now saying that they are alarmingly high.
And then can you also update us on corn and maize in the US and the EU in particular?
So if we look at the US first for corn, it's still pretty amazing. We've got crop conditions which remain really high. That's 74% good to excellent, and that 74% rating has been the same for the past 3 weeks. At this time of the season, because the summer gets hotter, drier, normally you see those conditions dip. They're not dipping. So the weather has been very benign, very beneficial by having an alternate of heat and rain. And last week we were hearing some noise of southern Midwest potential pollination issues, but with those ratings, people are not concerned. Before I go to the EU, Brazil also gave us an update, Agro in particular. So the second corn crop is still harvesting. It's slower harvest progress than previous years. We're about 55 to a third done, to 2/3 done, I should say. But the Agro estimate that came in this week is quite high for the entire crop. It's 136.3 million tons, up from 130.6 previously. And that goes towards the Brazilian estimate we had from our Brazilian colleagues at 136.1. So again, confirmation of a big crop. And then to compare, the EU eased the issue. So we've been talking for the past few weeks of that heat and hot weather problem from France all the way to Eastern Europe. And it's all about listening to what people say in wheat and then adapting it to maize. We've heard of harvest delays in parts of Germany and Poland because of rain. That rain is obviously beneficial for part of the maize area. Now, in terms of conditions, if we look at the barometer that we always have, which is basically the Agrima figures, they're 72% good to excellent. We've lost another 3%. So 72% is still high. But when we compare to early June, we've lost 13%. And when we compare to last year, we've lost 9%. In terms of the Maize figure that came out also, the yields are estimated at European level at 7.18 ton per hectare. That's down from 7.46 previously estimated. So we're still in a phase where it is being assessed. We know that it's not as good as initially anticipated, but it may not be as bad as feared because there's been some beneficial rains there and there. And if we look at Ukraine, the exports from Ukraine are said to be a touch slow compared to the norm at this time of the season.
And any interesting updates to bring us to in oilseeds?
So oilseeds, if I look at the US, the crop conditions were a little bit of a surprise. So in corn, they stayed very stable. In soybean, they dipped, and they dipped by 3% compared to the previous week. So we're 68% good to excellent in the US compared to 71%. It's still better than the 5-year average. And it should have supported soybean, but soybean had another element that came against it, which is basically the US and China starting to talk about meeting again and talking about a potential deal and extending the tariff deadline to the 12th of August. So we're going to have to watch those elements as far as soybean is concerned. Now, if we look at rapeseed has had a few bits of news which have been interesting for us, whether it's rapeseed or canola. So China is still firmly shutting the door to Canada, but I mentioned it last week, and it's still something that has been in the discussions. The door to Australia might be reopening. So Australia has been sending 5 cargo ships of canola as a test to China. It is non-GM canola, and it's going to be interesting to see if that trade route is getting reopened. And in a context of polarization of trade, it's interesting. In terms of Europe and Ukraine, the Europeans have been telling us that especially in Germany, the consumers had a little bit of panic when they heard about the Ukrainian new export tax. So Ukraine put an export tax of 10% on rapeseed and soybean. So that means less opportunity to buy at a decent price from Ukraine at a time when there's been some rain in Germany, so the harvest is slower at that point. So some German consumers were slightly bidding up on the physical market, we are being told, in order to try to secure seeds. In terms of oil content, we're being told that in Germany it's very satisfactory, it's some 43% plus, and in France it's very good, 45% plus. At European level, Maize came in again with some indications saying that it's 3.2 ton per hectare, up from 3.18 previously estimated.
And finally, we spoke a lot about harvest progress, which is natural at this time of year. But what about geopolitics?
Well, it is a little bit of a relief that I've been able to talk about fundamentals first and geopolitics last. The harvest is putting the geopolitics slightly in the shadow, but it is still present. It is still a risk of chaos. For us, it's the polarization, the US trying to bring a new trade order, but there's been some developments which could be interesting. So first of all, Russia and Ukraine are talking today, so they're meeting tonight in Turkey. So the peace process is resuming. It's a way off, but at least the discussions are resuming. And when we look at the US, there's been some success from Trump. There's been a US Bangladesh deal, for example, over the past week that represents about 700,000 tons of wheat from the US going to Bangladesh over the next 5 years each year. That's about 10% of what they consume. or import, I should say. There's also been one deal yesterday, which is US Philippines, and then this morning US Japan. So the US Japan one, probably more important to the auto industry, but it may become important in terms of corn. We don't have any details yet. And the Philippines one could be important in corn as well, but we don't have any details just yet. Now, we still have some doubts on others. The EU and the US are still trying to find some understanding. Presumably, that's going to happen by the 1st of August. Trump is still insisting on a minimum of 15 to 20% tariff on European goods. And outside of Europe, we see that the other big blocs are trying to find ways of getting away from US dependency, away from US polarization of trade. And one good example is Canada mentioning that they want to talk to Mercosur to try to look at the possibility of a deeper trade deal.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your insights, Bert. For more videos like this, please do like and subscribe.